witchers, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are finally going to be talking about Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman. If you've been around my channel for a while now, you know that I absolutely love Alice Hoffman. She's one of my favorite authors. She's one of those authors that's an instant buy for me. I don't even need to know what the book's about. I buy it. She dabbles a lot in magical realism, which is one of my favorite genres to read. I absolutely love it. Anything with witches, I'm in. And Magic Lessons happens to be a part of a series about a family of witches, the Owens family. The first book was Practical Magic, which was later made into a film. The second book was called The Rules of Magic, which was a sequel. And now Magic Lessons is the prequel. Now, if you've read Practical Magic, or even if you saw the film, you will know that kind of at the core of the Owens family is a curse. And that curse is any man who falls in love with an Owens sister is doomed to die. It was a curse placed on the family by one of the family members many, many years before Practical Magic takes place. And that kind of plays out throughout the story. So in Magic Lessons, we get to find out the history of who placed the curse, why they did it, and just all the backstory that comes along with the Owens family. And I think this one is my favorite out of all three of them. I loved this one so much. Practical Magic 2, The Rules of Magic stays at third place. It was good, but it wasn't my favorite. Practical Magic was great. This was so good. It was so good. It took me a while to read it because I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to take my time and enjoy the story. So that's why you're getting this now instead of a week or two ago. But so we'll get a bit into the plot, then I'll give a warning before I get into any spoilers, just in case you haven't read it yet and you want to. I will warn you. So basically, this book tells us the sort of beginning of the line, like the lineage for the Owens family. And it starts back in, I think, the 1500s, the 1600s. And we meet at first a woman named Hannah, and she finds a baby abandoned, like in the woods. The baby's wrapped up tight in a blanket in a bassinet. The baby's name is embroidered on the blanket, so she immediately gets the feel that whoever is the mother of this child cared about her, but for whatever reason had to leave her. So Hannah takes her in and cares for her as though she was her own. So we get to learn a bit about Hannah and a bit about the baby, whose name is Maria. And we get to watch this family begin to form between these two people who kind of just have each other. And as Maria gets a bit older, some things transpire, and a woman shows up, and shortly thereafter we realize that this woman is Maria's biological mother. From there, we just learn about Maria's story. She's the main character in this throughout the whole book, and we learn about her and her life. We learn about the people who greatly impact her life. We get to see what causes her to place the curse on the family, a curse that in the moment when it is conjured comes from such a deep place within her soul, because she feels she has been tricked and manipulated and wronged and betrayed. And she doesn't want another woman in her family to ever feel the same way she feels in that moment. And it's at a very dramatic point in her life when she thinks she's going to die, and she places this curse because in that moment, she is just searing with rage, and she just doesn't want another woman to go through it. As time goes on, we see that she sort of comes to regret that curse, as you would, once you realize the full consequences of it. But at that point, throughout the book, many times it's repeated, what is done cannot be undone. And that's just sort of a mantra, and she kind of has to come to terms with that. There are so many stories inside of this story that we would be here all night if I tried to tell you bit for bit how the story goes. But I will say for now, if you don't want spoilers, click away. I don't want to ruin anything for anybody, and I'm afraid I'm going to say something that could be considered a spoiler. So click away if you don't want spoilers. I would 100% recommend this book. It is darker than the other two, and we'll get into why now in a minute, but it's darker than the others. It goes to a darker place because of some things that happen, which I loved. I loved that. I loved getting to delve into kind of the darker side of magic with Maria's daughter. And it's so good. If you love magical realism, if you love practical magic, if you love books about magic in general, this could be read on its own. Right on the cover it says, the prequel to Practical Magic, but honestly, you could read this on its own and you would have enough information to not be confused. It's so good. So thank you for watching. Now we're gonna get into some spoilers. So like I said, there's so many stories in here that we'd be here for hours if I tried to tell them all to you. So I'm going to try to stick to the main thread of the story, which is Maria and then her eventual daughter, Faith. So Maria falls in love with a man named John Hawthorne when she's fairly young, and she thinks that he's one kind of man, but he is not that kind of man. He's just kind of wishing he was that kind of man, but we know and he knows and she eventually knows that he's just not. And she ends up getting pregnant, and he gives her a handful of diamonds, which is something that she had seen earlier in her life when she was foretelling her own future. She saw a handful of diamonds, and so she believes that he is the love that has been foretold to her. And when it turns out that he isn't, that's heartbreaking, of course. She ends up having her daughter. Later she finds out that John had a whole other family, like a wife, the whole bit. And so she decides to leave that country to go to America. So she takes her daughter and she goes down to the docks, and there she finds a man who's getting ready to set sail with a whole crew. Turns out his name is Abraham. He has a son named Samuel who's very sick. She promises to heal him if Abraham lets her come aboard. He's skeptical at first, but his son is very clearly dying, and so she takes him up on the offer. He's a grown son, and she begins to cure him with a number of herbs and elixirs and teas, and of course this creates a bond between them, and in many ways they fall in love with each other during this trip from somewhere in Europe, I think, over to America. She's making the trip because eventually she finds out where John Hawthorne lives, and she's going to go find him and tell him about their child together. So she's off. She gets to America. Her and Samuel go their own way, even though they shared some really intimate moments together. And he wishes that she was more interested in him than she is, but, c'est la vie, so they go their separate ways. Faith begins to grow up. When she's 5 or 6 years old, Maria comes under fire for being a witch. And she's going to be hanged, and they put her in a jail cell. And a neighbor woman asks Maria, like, do you want me to take her so that she's not stuck in this jail cell with you? And Maria's like, yes, thank you, take her. Keep her safe until either I get out of here or I just raise her, What else are you supposed to do when you're in jail getting ready to be hanged? So the woman takes her and runs with her, which we find out later is very bad. She's not a good woman. She does not have good intentions for this child. So on the day that Maria is set to be hanged, Samuel shows up. So this is still very early on in the book. Samuel shows up and he says, you saved my life, I'm going to save yours. During the night, he switches the rope, the hanging rope, with one from his ship that is very frayed and he knows will break once Maria's weight is put upon it, and it does. And because she managed to escape, she's free to go. But it was when she was about to be hanged that she shouted this curse, that any man who loves an Owens is fated to die. So she tells Samuel, like, cool, we can be friends, but that's it. Like, you cannot love me and I can't love you. And he's like, well, what if I loved you before the curse? And of course, as we're seeing throughout this book, I was gonna say this movie, this book, anytime, which if you've read Practical Magic or seen the movie, you'll be familiar with the Death Watch beetle that croaks whenever death is near. So, right before she is to be hanged, she hears that beetle, but then he saves her. But yeah, she says, no, no, I don't want anything bad to happen to you. So they decide to live together as friends, and eventually his dad comes to stay too, and they make a nice little family for each other, even though, of course, she is now desperately searching for her daughter who was taken from her. And we get to see things from Faith's point of view, from how her life is now that so Marie and Samuel and Abraham are living in Manhattan. Faith and Martha is the woman who took her, are living in Brooklyn. So like distance-wise, it's not very far, but of course in the 1600s, you might as well have been on the other sides of the earth. You're not going to find each other just by chance. So we see Faith's life. She is often locked up. Martha has noticed that she has these powers, just like her mother did, and so she's put iron cuffs on the girl so she can't access her powers, because iron renders a witch almost entirely powerless. So Faith is suffering a lot. And as the years, as the days and months and years tick by, Faith is becoming more and more bitter and angry on the inside, even though on the outside she's projecting this picture of the perfect daughter so that Martha will leave her alone. Martha won't get mad at her. So eventually, after 5 years, she manages to escape, which Martha ends up dead. And she manages to escape, and she finds a kind gentleman to bring her to Manhattan, and she finds her mother quite quickly. And of course, they're so happy to be reunited, but soon thereafter, we begin to notice that Faith is a little off. Those 5 years of abuse have changed her, as they would to anybody. But for her, she's changed in a way that's reflecting in her magic. And while her mom is trying to teach her, herbs and teas and the good and helpful ways to use your magic, Faith begins to crave a darker sort of magic, black magic, left-handed magic, as it's called, which I take offense to because I'm left-handed. But yeah, so she begins to venture into the dark arts, we'll call them. And she begins to use her powers for evil in some ways, in ways that make even her familiar, a very sweet wolf named Keeper, begin to question her and begin to turn on her. And so eventually she decides that she's going to leave. She doesn't want to stay there anymore. She wants to go to Salem because the Salem witch trials have begun. And Faith knows that her father is there, John Hawthorne. He's kind of like, at this point, the leader of the witch hunters. And she wants to go and teach him a lesson once she finds out who her father is. And so she goes and she has a confrontation with him, which kind of ends with her, in the end, deciding not to harm him with her magic. But at that point, she's already kind of gone beyond the fray. She's gone beyond the point of no return. And so what ends up happening to her is kind of the universe takes the power away from her, and she's left just a normal girl who can't do any more harm. Even though, you know, the harm she was doing was in reaction to being so abused for so many years. And so anyway, earlier on in the book, Maria had sent Samuel away because she didn't want to hurt him because of the curse. And they end up reunited at the end, which is kind of nice. And he has a near-death experience, which kind of lets them work around the curse, because she's like, well, you kind of died and now you're back, so the you that was alive when the curse was made, you know, it's kind of different, and they kind of talk themselves into a way that this could possibly work. And before he has this near-death experience, she heard the Death Watch beetle cricketing, whatever you'd call it, creaking, no creaking, crying, I don't know. Clacking, I think, is how it's described at one point in the book. She hears it, and then after the near-death experience where he nearly drowns, it has stopped. So it's kind of, they found a loophole around that. Really just, by the time you get to the end, you're so glad that they found a way to work around it. I was really afraid he was going to die because he's just so good, and I didn't want that to happen to him or to her. And they end up having another baby, which they name Hannah after the woman who had kind of adopted Maria from the woods. And was just a wonderful woman. And when I got to the final pages, I definitely shed a tear. I loved it so much. And the final paragraph, I think, just sums it up so nicely. And I'll just read it to you now real quick. So it's kind of the lessons, the magic lessons, if you will, that she has learned throughout her life. And it's, these are the lessons to be learned. Drink chamomile tea to calm the spirit. Feed a cold, starve a fever. Read as many books as you can. Always choose courage. Never watch another woman burn. Know that love is the only answer. And I loved that, and it definitely made me shed a few tears. I love that. Never watch another woman burn. What good advice. Both literal for her time, but also in many ways for our time as well, you know. And I just really loved that. Great lessons. A wonderful story. It's so good. And like I said, you can read it on its own. You don't need to have read Practical Magic or The Rules of Magic to be able to follow along and enjoy it. It's very easy to understand without having read those. But if you are familiar with Practical Magic especially, there'll be many times when something will be said or done and you'll be like, oh yes, I know about that already, thanks to the Owen sisters that we first got to know and love. And it was interesting too, because between Maria and Faith, they were sort of reflected in the Practical Magic Owen sisters. Maria reminded me a lot of Sally, and yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was beautifully tied together. The three of the books work great, but especially this one and Practical Magic, they work so good. The Rules of Magic also good, but that one did not hit me as hard as these two did. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman. I just love her. If you love Alice Hoffman as well, let me know in the comments down below. What's your favorite book of hers? The last one that I reviewed on this channel was, I think, called The World That We Knew. And that was great. That was just such a different story. I thought it was fantastic. Before that, we read The Rules of Magic. Before that, we read Faithful. We've just read a ton of her books. And I can't wait to see what the next one is. So, yeah, I hope you guys have a great day. I will be back soon again with another video. And see you then.